We are midway through, we're on Wednesday, midway through the summit, and it's been really a privilege to share the screen with so many wonderful thinkers, artists, and collaborators. Although we're not together, this forum has felt very intimate. It's felt like we've been able to engage and talk and think through some important concerns. So as I said, thank you for being here today. Today we are discussing collectivity and collaboration as radical practice. I'll be your moderator. My name is Tammy Langtry. I'm assistant curator here at Tshepo. And I'm joined by quite an amazing panel. Before I officially introduce them, I just want to put up some ground rules, which I know my colleague has mentioned in the chat. We would like to keep this space as respectful and open-minded as possible. All attendees have been muted, but you can please use the Q&A and the chat section to engage with us throughout. We will have a Q&A section a bit later. So please do engage us there. Just to refresh you on the program, we will be having this discussion now. Thereafter, we will watch the film Mother, I Am Suffering. This is my last film about you, written and directed by Lemohang Jeremiah Mosese. This will be on YouTube, and for those of you who haven't received a link or might not have the link, it will be dropped in the chat a bit later. So you'll be able to find it there. We'll come back here on Zoom at 7:30 p.m. for a discussion between Lemohang and my colleague Phokeng Setai. And then at 8:10, as you know the format, at 8:10 p.m. we'll be doing a reading. Now that we are caught up on the program, it brings us to the here and now and the group that we'll be engaging with today. And I want to start off by reading their biographies and introducing them. For the panelists, if you'd like to put your video on, you're welcome to visually join us. We are joined today by ruangrupa, and Dan and Farid there. ruangrupa is a Jakarta-based collective established in 2000. It's a non-profit organization which strives to support the idea of art within urban and cultural contexts, involving artists and other disciplines such as social sciences, politics, technology, media, etc., to give critical observation and views towards Indonesian urban contemporary issues. ruangrupa also produce collaborative works in the form of art projects such as exhibitions, festivals, art labs, workshops, research, as well as book, magazine, and online journal publications. As an artist collective, ruangrupa has been involved in many collaborative exchange projects, including participating in quite large exhibitions and biennales: Guangzhou Biennale, Istanbul Biennale, Asia Pacific Triennale of Contemporary Art, which is in Brisbane, Singapore Biennale, and Sao Paulo Biennale. We have provided you more extensive biographies, which you can go back to. In 2016, ruangrupa curated Trans Action Sonsbeek 2016 in Arnhem, Netherlands, and currently are serving as the collective artistic directors for the upcoming Documenta 15. This is due to launch in 2022. Today, we have 2 of the 10 members of the group. Thank you, Farid and Andan. Lovely to have you here. I'm going to move on to... Thank you. I'm going to move on to Dr. Bonaventure Bejeng Ndikung. He's an independent curator, author, and biotechnologist. He's founder and artistic director of Savvy Contemporary in Berlin and the artistic director of Sonsbeek 2020 to 2024, quadrennial contemporary art exhibition in Arnhem in the Netherlands. Ndikung was the curator at large for Documenta 14 in Athens and Kassel. He was a guest curator of the Dakar Biennale in 2018 and the artistic director of the 12th Bamako Encounters Photography Biennale in 2019. Together with the Medical Workers Collective, he curated the Finland Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2019, was a guest professor in curatorial studies and sound art at the Stadelschule in Frankfurt. He's currently a professor in the Spatial Strategies MA program at the Wiesenseek Academy of Art in Berlin, and also the recipient of the first OCAD University International Curators Residency Fellowship in Toronto in 2020. Hello, Bonaventure. Lovely to have you here. I'm going to move on to Marie-Helene Pereira. She's graduated in management and international business law. After a few years of work within the business world, she shifted her professional interest to arts and culture. She is the powerhouse director of programs at Raw Material Company, where she has organized exhibition-related discursive programs, including the participation of Raw Material Company to We Face Forward, Art from West Africa Today, Whitworth Art Gallery Manchester, ICI Curatorial Hub in New York, the 9th Shanghai Biennale, Marre Art Dubai. She co-curated Scattered Seeds in Cali, Colombia, and curated Battling to Normalize Freedom at Clark House Initiative in Mumbai, India. Pereira was a co-curator of Canine Wisdom for the Barking Dog, The Dog Done Gone Deaf, exploring the sonic cosmologies of Halim Al-Dab with Dr. Bonaventure Ndikung at the 13th edition of Dakar Biennale of Contemporary African Art. She has a strong interest in politics of identity and histories of migration. Welcome, Marie-Helene. And last but not least, Diana Campbell Betancourt. She's the founding artistic director of the Samdani Art Foundation and chief curator of the Dakar Art Summit, the foremost research and exhibition platform for art in South Asia. She has been building the Samdani collection and developing Srihata, an art center and sculpture park, which looks to commission site-specific installations while developing the foundation's education and public programs. She was curator of Frieze projects in London and the founding artistic director of Villas Artes projects in the Philippines. Educated at Princeton, she's been living and working across Asia since 2010, splitting her time between Brussels and Dakar. While these biographies, welcome Diana, while these biographies are contextual to these individuals' professional career, doesn't necessarily give us a lot of insight into their practices and processes, which I think we're going to spend this time doing. So once again, just to remind everyone, we're talking today on collectivity and collaboration as radical practice. During the lockdown, we all bared witness to the collective and global call to action, and not only to care or to protect ourselves by staying away or staying at home, but also in the need to gather to protect human life on multiple fronts. Whether hashtag Black Lives Matter or hashtag gender-based violence or hashtag Trans Lives Matter, the toppling of statues or the burning of buildings, the world became a stage to what was portrayed as the unending crisis, both in the body and for our livelihoods. It has called us to think in regional and transnational ways about what does solidarity mean beyond the performative. But for us at the museum and for this week, we'd really like to ask the questions: what does cultural practice and artistic production engage in acts of collectivity and collaboration? This call of solidarity for Black lives, both in the digital sphere and in the waves of protest, prioritized actions fundamental to the Pan-African movement. And I'm hoping we can touch on that during today's talk. More closely, and what you might have gleaned from the blurb, protests like the Yosoi 132, Roads Must Fall, anti-KKN, as well as the liberation movements of Yenama and the Arab Spring or African Revolt, as Koyo mentioned on day one, reaffirmed the agency of youth culture and demanding equality and decolonization at all costs. Brings to the fore the role of individuals to work independently from the state and work collaboratively to rally a cause. So we begin there in a kind of continuum. And I mentioned to the panel, I'm gonna kind of start with the most visible statement, which is radical solidarity, and ask them to respond to what that means for them within their practice, within their collectives that they are directly linked to. And I'm gonna ask ruangrupa to go first. I hope you don't mind.
Sure. Thank you very much. I think me and Andan can be replaceable. We're playing total football here, but I can start maybe. On that note, I think it's good to start with how we were founded. It was like after 1998. For those who don't know, the 1998, the year of 1998 was important for Indonesians because it's where the new order fell. And then during we were young at that moment, of course. But experiencing that new order regime, let's say, there's a lot of like, this is kind of like, for those who know Indonesia, maybe I could sound a bit generalizing, but because of the time, I think also I cannot avoid it. But there's a lot of repression, including like the ability to congregate. So on paper, if there's like more than 5 people who are not family being in one room, the state has the right to interrogate them, basically. So under that type of things, the 1998 topple down of Suharto happened, and then there's an euphoria of being together. I don't know whether it's radical or not, because yeah, it's kind of like, for us, a lot of things that we do we are not courageous enough to call it radical, but we're just like, and it's not only in the art scene, there are a lot of other scenes that are more active up until now, that experience the euphoria, or like the, you know, like when a jar, the top of a jar just suddenly burst open, then a lot of things happen randomly, you know? And then ruangrupa is one of them, basically. And then we were just like celebrating that ability to come together, renting, a possibility of renting a house actually, and then call it our hangout space. Some of us slept there, and then up until now, even like, although officially we couldn't make our space as a sleeping space, domestic space, because there's a lot of problem coming from there, but still we cannot tell anyone not to do it, really, no? So that we started from there, and then we were just like, it just happened that a lot of us were artists, not all, but then, so that's why it made sense at that moment to call ourselves Artist Collective. Then the question became like, what kind of art could we make together instead of like a collection of individual practices, let's say, you know? So the sensibility came from there, and then after that, like we grew. There were a lot of collectives also like formed at that moment. So after maybe like more than 10 years navigating all this kind of stuff, Jakarta became more expensive day by day, and then we thought to gang up together to form even like collective of collectives, you know, with different kind of sensibilities, goals, responsibilities, even like context, etc. So we were playing with that kind of formats, let's say, keep on saying all the time how to do stuff with collectives, experimenting with it, how to become transparent to each other, how to actually co-govern our economy, all those kind of stuff. Then at one point we managed to secure a certain kind of resources that we could finally not rent, but also buy. So we own a property, let's say, so we don't need to pay rent anymore, not like spending 30% of our annual budget to someone else, etc., etc. And then So it's not only ruangrupa, it's also Serum and Grafis Huru-Hara. We form what's called Good School now. So it is kind of like a way for us to consider ourselves as a resource and then how to share it to other people, especially those who are not in the Indonesian cultural cities, let's say. So Jogja, Bandung, and then Jakarta. No, that's the cultural cities in Indonesia. So outside of these three, how can we share looking at ourselves as a resource, not only it's a space, it's a knowledge, it's also like networks, etc., etc. How can we share that resource further and then much more straightforward, let's say. There's a systematic approach to it. We're still experimenting with it. A lot of like failures, of course. There's a lot throughout the years. This is like the third year. The Good School was founded in 18, November 2018. So there's a lot of like trial and error. And then, of course, the meaning of solidarity, maybe it's kind of like diverse as well from those phases, let's say, from when we found ourselves up until we found Good School. And then one of the things that we experiment with is actually like that collective governance of resources. And then that's what we are trying to expand with Documenta. So it's not something new. So it's kind of like, what if this collective governance of resources could be also practiced in a planetary scale? Of course, we're in the middle of the process right now. There's a lot of walls, invisible work that we need to face, but we can dive deeper into it maybe later, but that's basically it. So other places that has not been touched by Documenta, let's say, like ourselves. So far, up until now, we're not exclusive, so we kind of like try to think whether Documenta can serve the purpose of playing a part, actually, sustaining these types of practices further. And then maybe wants to add. I've talked too much. Maybe.
Yeah, it's fine if you talk too much. So, yeah. Thank you for inviting us to be here to meet online, because there are many talks around. Like this is the second or the third meeting, online meeting we have today. In any different kind of issues, and two of them were not arts, which is good, and yeah, as Farid mentioned that there are in Indonesian historical timelines, 1998 is a year. What was I want to mention again what Sukarno said in 60s. The 1998 was vivere pericoloso, or years living in dangerously. And many people like, especially people from middle class like us, try to figure it out what to do during this vivere pericoloso, or the years living in dangerously. And then, as Farid mentioned, at the time, most of us were still young. Most of us under 30, I think. I don't know, Farid. maybe was still in the senior high school. And then what already happened for 32 years, or 32 years up until from 1965 to 1998 was the years where history was manipulated by the regime, and then the history was the history was written to make us not to be aware to the situation around, including to the grassroots. But yeah, there are also some efforts to work and bring all the things which are not allowed to be in public to be on the surface. And then that's the reason why many events during the New Order regime still has a legacy up until now. And then one of the reasons why ruangrupa was started was that it was an effort to figure out after being manipulated by history, manipulated by the history that was written by the regime. And then and soon after the ruangrupa was started, there was an early consciousness or awareness that this thing was not only to be formed only for artists or art and cultural practices. That's the reason why many people not from who didn't have any backgrounds from art school become part of ruangrupa. And then for me, it has been enriching. It has been enriching the things that ruangrupa has been working up until now. That it's not only for art. It's not only for art. Like what we are doing now. What we are doing now to prepare documenta was the theme, which is lumbung. It's actually not inspiration we got after contemplating for days and weeks, but it's a practice that we've been living in even before ruangrupa was formed. It's our DNA. It's in our DNA to hang out, to chit chat, to share what we have, because we realized that there was a time that resources was really limited, only for certain kind of group of peoples, certain kind of group of people who had access to the main resource. And that's also the reason why that in ruangrupa we are really happy if we are so happy to see if our friends achieve or reaching something. And this is coming actually. I'm not. ruangrupa is based in Java Island, and I come from an island called Sulawesi. For your information, Indonesia is an archipelagic country with 17,520 something islands. Java and Sulawesi is two different islands. Jakarta, which is situated in Java, it takes 2 hours away by plane to go to Sulawesi. And I come from a place called Sulawesi in Makassar. And I'm a Bugis person. I'm a Bugis guy. And in there is a philosophy where I was raised with this philosophy, which is called Matola Palalo. Matola Palalo means that we are happy to see other people to achieve something. I mean, other people who are part of us. This philosophy is very interesting because we are really happy to see people to achieve something. People who hang out with us, who share things with us. And then that's also the reason why, for me, that's the reason why Ruangrupa can stand for 20 years up until now. Even though when it was started in 2000, most of the people thought that it will only stand for 1 year and then it will be disbanded. But after year and year, and then it's now 20 years. The reason why that, for me, that one of the reason why it can last up until now, it's because of this thing that we are happy to see people to achieve something. We are happy to see people around us who come and share things with us. We are happy to see them to achieve something which is important for their life and also for the context where they come from, or for the neighborhood where they live, or for the context where they hang out. I think it's from me for now. Farid, maybe. Farid, what in 1998? How old were you?
Turning 16, so 15, turning 16.
Oh, 15, okay.
Right.
Okay.
Teenagehood. Thank you for that. And thank you for the reflection on what drives the collective, the joy, seeing the joy in others, seeing the joy in the collective. I appreciated that. And I'm noting that. And Farid, also thank you for your contribution. I think we'll definitely want to swing back to kind of where your heads are at with Documenta and Good School, definitely. I'm gonna ask Bonaventure to jump in and respond to this as he speaks to those around him. The notions of radical solidarity, what is that for you?
Greetings all. Sorry, we are a bit in a construction site here, so it will be loud and obviously dirty, but that's the reality. That's our reality at Sabi. Good to see you all, and thanks for the invitation once more. Greetings to Koyo and Storm and the many others in the background that have been doing incredible work, and of course to all the panelists. Really good to see you. Now, I'll try to keep it very brief, so I can continue talking to the others in the background. Solidarity, there is definitely an inflation, in the usage of the word solidarity, in the past, especially the past months, to the point that we actually do not really know. I think so. One of the things we have to be doing is recalibrating to think what solidarity could actually mean. So, and how solid is the solid in solidarity, From my end, and from the end of Savvy Contemporary, we're struggling with that question as well. We do not know what solidarity is. We're like tapping in the dark, finding a way, a path of what could be solidarity. But I dread to talk about solidarity within the art context, in which we all find ourselves and, can do what we can do. There are really quite some pressing issues happening in the world, and for which I would actually like to think about solidarity in those cases, So because our good people, dear friends from ruangrupa talked about the Indonesian context, I wanted to also bring up the Cameroonian context here. I come from a part of Cameroon, from Bamenda specifically, which has been under siege, under a war for the past 4 years. In any case, since independence, we've had our issues, right? So, but in the past 4 years, it's been, really terrible. So when thinking about solidarity, we're really thinking about how to solidarize, how to work, how to think, how to be with the people in those parts of the country. Last year, 60,000 of them had to flee and leave the country as refugees, children, women, men, going to Nigeria. Just the internally displaced are more than 100,000. So in terms of solidarity, it's difficult to really think when I have this reality, this history in my face. And I'm talking about this because my parents had to flee the town, and my father, died out of the country because of that, So it's really, it's a tough thing to talk about solidarity within the art context when there is this reality. Now, that said, as an art space that has the possibility of doing certain things, we've been asking ourselves in the past years, what can we do? What can we do? What can art really do? And what can us, what can we as people within the art sphere really do? And one of the things we've been thinking about, and a project we started a few months ago is called iToxe, which is a photographic project and an archive project. Basically, when I went to Cameroon in January this year and traveled to Bamenda, which, it's really almost a no-go area if you're coming from outside. And what we definitely saw was that the city had been taken 40 years behind time, destroyed, completely. So, and one of the things that becomes very clear in such a context is the lack of the archive. People adapt to the current situation very fast. So what we've been trying to do is create a photographic archive of the region. So we've done a couple of open calls and people are contributing images as far back as the existence of photography from that area to try to create a kind of a public collective memory of that space, So I don't know if that is solidarity, but we're trying to do something. We've also been trying to work with some people, that have been hosting internally displaced people from the region, from the Anglophone region of Cameroon, people that had to move from Bamenda to Douala, had to move from Bamenda to Yaoundé, and so on and so forth. So as an art space, we've been trying to, gather material, even finances and so on and so forth to support structures there. We've been supporting artists also that have been working on these projects, an artist like Chantal Eddy, for example, who did an incredible project about the internally displaced. She had a two-room apartment in Douala in which she hosted 12 people that came in, So we invited her to Berlin to talk about this, to create more awareness about what is happening, but also supporting, on the ground, in whatever way possible. So I don't know if that is solidarity, but that's what we're trying to do, okay? Savi was founded in 2009, for many reasons. But one of the reasons was that some people like us couldn't have the spaces to show the art they wanted to do in Berlin, So a couple of us came together. Now we're about 30 people working in something one might call a collective. But again, even collectives, even the term is problematic. So we're trying to find new names that can carry us. In any case, these people come from 15 different countries, speak as much languages, and we try to, create something that one can call a laboratory. So we present work here, we do more theoretical things, we do a lot of research, and we try to collaborate, in like working together with artists and with project spaces, especially around the world, be it in Dakar, be it in Rio, be it in I don't know, in Essaouira, and so on and so forth. So basically what we've been trying to do is travel and do projects. But essentially one could also say that we're also redistributing. We're taking German taxpayers' money and distributing in the world. So it's also a strategy of solidarity, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, what are the example? I mean, I don't know what to say. So because I don't really know what solidarity is. So I'm just, you know, wrapping around things. But I remember one of the things that happened when I got into the documenter team, Adam Chimchik, who was the artistic director, had asked me to make a proposal. You know, what do you want to do? You know, so I said I wanted to do a radio. You know, so. So he said, okay, well, radio, and the other curators said, well, we can do internet radio. I said, no, I want us to do really radio, you know, shortwave, you know, that thing, you know. So, and the question was then, why do you want to do that? Because it's quite expensive, you know. And my simple answer was, you know, I want my grandmother who was in Batu, in a village somewhere, to be part of Documenta, you know. So how do we find a way in which this thing that claims of itself the most important exhibition in the world, but it's limited in a very small village called Kassel. I mean, you know, it's ridiculous, you know, but how can we actually make this accessible and bring people around? So we invited, you know, Ruru Radio, we invited radio stations from Brazil, from Cameroon, from other places, you know, to be part of this, you know, radio as the art itself and as the medium par excellence, you know, and actually my grandmother could also be part of it, you know, so again, I don't know if that's solidarity, but you know, as I said, I'm struggling with it. So that's my contribution for now.
We appreciate your struggles. I think that's what this week is for, is to go through these struggles and to concern ourselves with what solidarity means. If it is empty, I appreciated the word of, is there solid? Where's the solid in solidarity? I'm going to ask Marie-Helene to struggle a little bit more with us on this question, on this statement.
Sure. Thank you, Tammy, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation together with friends and colleagues. I really like the way in which you put this idea of solidarity into perspective, talking about what is going on now, like this global crisis. And ways in which it becomes more urgent to think about solidarity and maybe to give it meanings, etc., etc. For the part of RAW, I think that, I mean, thinking about it now with some distance, because we never really thought about giving a specific meaning and linking it to solidarity when RAW was starting, but I really think that the very initiative of establishing RAW was an act of solidarity. And even when you look at the raw material company, like raw material refers to the African continent as the continent of resources, but company refers to the act of togetherness when it's translated in French, la compagnie. And I really think that through establishing RAW, Koyo, maybe without putting it into words, did an act of solidarity. How, where, that's then where it becomes more interesting maybe. When you think about the artistic sphere in Senegal, and especially knowing that the first president of Senegal, Léopold Sédar Senghor, who was a writer and poet, really worked very hard into supporting artistic production. In the country, he established a lot of infrastructures, a lot of institutions. He was the mastermind behind the very first art school in Senegal, and also the very creation of the Dakar Biennale, that is one of the most important, if not the most important biennale of contemporary art today on the African continent. So there was a lot going on in terms of artistic practice in Senegal already. And the creation of RAW came at a point where there was a real lack of spaces that would put critical discourse around those practices, be it artistic practice or curatorial practice. So I really think that that's the starting point when we talk about or think about solidarity from the initiative of an institution. When we talk about the mission of RAW, we say that it's a center for art, knowledge, and society. So this idea of togetherness comes back again, like bringing awareness in the fact that what we are proposing to do and that what we are doing cannot happen with us alone. So there is this very idea of like bringing people together so that we can reflect on urgent matters that are related to our context, that are related to our practices, etc. And also, even though we are located in Senegal, RO has a Pan-African vocation. So this idea of working beyond physical borders also becomes very interesting when we talk about solidarity. Like I like to say that when you say solidarity, there are a couple of meanings that you can't left on the side. So togetherness being one of them, with this idea of clustering, support being one of them, and also resistance being one of them. So when looking at the work that RO has been doing here in Senegal, but looking at also from places that go beyond Senegal, becomes very, very important and interesting. And for us, it's always a matter of sharing. It's always a matter of opening a space of possibilities. It's always a matter of inviting our peers in order to reflect more on our responsibilities, but also our urgencies in terms of individuals, in terms of institutions who are working with the same vision, but with different methods, and who are using different forms in their own practices. Like something else that also came to my mind was this idea of creating alliances. I think it's important when we talk about solidarity to also be aware of the fact that we need allies in order to be able to do what we're doing. And that's what we have been trying to do since the establishment of RO up until today. When does it become radical? I don't have the answer now, but I really think that when you talk about alliances, when you talk about allies, then it is radical, you know, without you giving it the meaning, so radical solidarity. But in the practice, in the programs, in like the subjects that are put on the table for us to reflect around, in the programs that are put together, in the people and also the institution that we choose to work with, because it's a question of choice. Like we don't want to just work with anybody or whoever comes, but we really take time to filter and make sure that, okay, these people who we are inviting and us, we really have the same mission somehow, but we work differently. So the question of allies, I think, brings the radicality in the solidarity that we try to show in what we do.
Absolutely, thank you, Marilyn. I thought very much about allyship and forms of negotiation and ethics, and how do we define those forms of shared values and ethics in order to engage. What do we owe each other, or what? No, it came up earlier in the week of this debt owed to one another, which forms this bond. Yeah, thank you. Diana, kind of lost again. If you can please throw your hat in, throw the observation.
Sure. Well, maybe like some words to jam off of that came out of the beautiful things said by my colleagues, and also I echo all the thanks. And it's been so wonderful collaborating with almost everyone on this panel to build something kind of unthinkable in Bangladesh over the last, I guess almost a decade. But the words that kind of stuck with me was Bona's idea of recalibrate, Ruangrupa's idea of joy, and what Helene brought up of the idea of like the company, like a group of people, like a dance company, a theater company. So Bangladesh is a country that was about to be 50 years old, but at the same time, there's this concert, and I know a lot of people in Africa will have a lot to say about concerts as well, but the concert for Bangladesh, which George Harrison and Ravi Shankar catalyzed to kind of put the word Bangladesh on people's voices. So to give you an idea, in August of 1971, the US was supplying weapons to Pakistan. So they were anti-Bangladesh, yet somehow this group of creative people banding together was able to kind of give a voice to a place that wasn't on people's minds. So when I think about this, I think about like one voice can be talked over, but like a multitude of voices can basically sing over the loudest person in the room and you're going to remember the song. But when it comes to recalibrating, there's issues with that. Like the image on the cover of the album, which later won a Grammy and is still raising money for Bangladesh, is an image of a starving Bangladeshi child. When you see, and of course that was a problem at the time, but these are problems, but those voices drown out like the rich musical history that exists in Bangladesh. The fact that Bangladesh was only a poor country for the last, what, like 250, 300 years. It was one of the richest civilizations of all time. But I think if we look at this global majority world, our struggles of how we're represented are very similar. And there's more people living outside of North America and Europe than live in those places. And to give you a sense of Bangladesh, if you took the entire world's population and threw it into the United States, that's the population density, according to this recent book that I'm reading by Mohammed Yunus. But I'm really moved by this idea of banding together. And I think that idea of joy that ruangrupa brought up is like joy and hope are a form of seismic energy. Like without that energy, how do you fight back these kind of unthinkable forces? Or when we think of a lack of connectivity, I know in Africa, like the intercontinental connectivity is almost impossible. It's the same thing in South Asia. At one point, like a flight from Dhaka to Bombay was more expensive than a flight from Dhaka to Paris. And, you know, getting visas within the region, almost impossible. So, you know, it's a way of fracturing people. And my like own like ancestral background, my mother comes from this small island called Guam, but to pop between these islands in the Pacific is ridiculous. It's almost impossible. But when you think historically, those people were navigating and they were connecting in ways that are maybe unfathomable now. So these are a lot of, how do you say, ramblings, but I think this idea of banding together and creating a platform where voices that were previously drowned out can be heard when singing together is what we really tried to do by building the platform of the Dhaka Art Summit. So the summit was started in 2012 by a collector couple named Nadia and Rajiv Samdani. And around this time, museums like Tate were trying to create these South Asia acquisitions councils, but the collectors realized that to them, South Asia meant India. No one knew anything about Bangladesh, or not no one, but few people knew anything about the art scene in Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan. So they wanted to create a platform for research and to create opportunities for these art scenes that weren't part of this kind of international art world. And what we did by building this over time was actually bring people to the context. So not everyone can have a visa to go outside. Not everyone's work fits in the framework of what maybe a Western museum thinks South Asia is, but to show this work in the local context and to actually bring people to experience how you can build an institution from the ground up, celebrating what we do have and what we can build and not complaining about what we don't have there. I mean, of course we do complain sometimes, but you know, this idea of building something, a platform for people whose voices couldn't be heard over time, and recalibrating and retuning as we go. So our last summit, which was our guests, you know, we collaborated with RAW to do a conference about collectives and institution building across the global majority world. Our summit finished on February 15th. We had 500,000 people in 9 days visit, or 477,153, so we can round up, but visiting the summit over 9 days. And we had comments like groups of queer kids coming where like this was the only place in Dhaka they could be themselves. So that for me was really great, where we could create a safe space where people could talk about ideas that maybe they didn't feel comfortable talking about in public. With that kind of multitude, you feel that there's other people with you, and that to me was a real sense of solidarity.
Yes, thank you. The condition report 4 was definitely, the summit and those conversations were definitely an amazing resource to join minds in thinking about what does this history of collectivity mean and look like. Helene, do you want to just add in terms of what that research was based on and what you brought forward?
Yes, sure. I think like when we received the invitation from Diana and her team, and more specifically the fact that she wanting to talk about seismic movements, for us it was important at that stage to bring all the reflection we already started when talking about collectivity. And I think one of our main examples was, or still is actually, the Laboratoire Agitart, which was an artist collective founded in the early 70s by renowned artist Issa Sam, together with a couple of other artists and thinkers. And through the work of the Laboratoire, we really got a lot of transmission coming from Issa Sam and also coming from everything that was happening around the Laboratoire, everything that the Laboratoire had put together in terms of political activism, in terms of bringing communities together through artistic practice, in terms of reacting also to the current, the politics of that time from the President Leopold Sédar Senghor, and so on and so on. So I think the very idea of collectivity through the work of the Laboratoire was the main trigger for all the reflection we did, or all the research that we did, thinking about ideas of solidarity, and specifically for the Dakar Art Summit, thinking about translocal solidarity. So in the symposium, we wanted to first talk about different forms of collectives, also looking at aesthetics, and also the way in which those collectives participated in the history of contemporary artistic practice in the different contexts. We also wanted to talk about the writing of history, the way in which collectively we participate in writing history, and in that sense looking at previous but also more contemporary initiatives. And we also wanted to look at collective practice and economy, especially in the capitalist context in which we live in. And also we wanted to talk about the death of the collective or its transformation. And in this case, really not thinking about the collective ending, but thinking about ways in which the different legacies of different collectives could be archived, could be still seen and used as sources of new forms of practices today. And of course, it was important for us that all these reflections are done together with institutions from institutional artist collective, thinkers from the Asian continent. So it wasn't only Bangladesh, but we really invited artist collective that were based in Asia and that were working from Asia. And that really helped us into having a space, a diverse space for conversation, mutual learning, and also exchange. Ruangrupa was part of that, of the symposium, and we had other collective that were from Bangladesh, Gidri Bali, Shoni Mongol Ada, among others, and it really helped us into pushing further these reflections around ideas of collectivity and solidarity. And the whole symposium is actually available online on the Dakar Art Summit YouTube channel.
Thank you, Maria-Helene. I wanted to ask, I guess, Farid Andan specifically on these.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you specifically. I heard in a recent interview you did referring to the collective as a response to notions of or social wounds and traumas, and how modes of care, modes of collecting is modes of caring. And yeah, I want you to talk a little bit more about how this is engaged with your practice.
Yeah, I think like I don't think we were talking about collective at that moment specifically, but like because like collective is only one way of working, and then I don't like working with that for for a while now, since especially in ruangrupa, let's say. It's also like, it's clear as well, it's not the only mode of working, but maybe right now it rings kind of like louder than before because of the circumstances we are under, no? I think like when we, my guess, my assumption is like, when we said those things, it was before, let's say, the pandemic situation we are all under right now, and then we have to pay the consequences for. But we were thinking about the rainy days that was about to come, and then we didn't know that actually winter comes early, you know. But we were thinking that something like an institution of art, let's say, or it's kind of difficult to think about art like what Bonaventure was saying right now. Which one is art, which one is not? Because I don't think it's I think it's a non-problem right now. It's much more important to think what we can do given the card we are dealt with, no? And then if the card we are dealt with right now happens to be in contemporary art, let's say, then how to think about to practice these institutions, like, you know, from museums to biennials to quadrennials, etc., even collectives itself, how it can play a role for others. If it's about, if the context you are dealing with has wounds, let's say, maybe it's time to address those wounds in order to heal it. So it's much more hopeful, let's say, in that sense. It's not about making visible certain things that that actually going to even sharpen the tension, at least for now. It's kind of like, it's really, well, we were, maybe we're still punks this way, but like, the most punk you can do right now is actually to be joyful. That's maybe what we can think about, because everyone's frowning, you know. The world is asking us to frown even. So it's kind of like, that's where we come from. Like, if the history of certain art exhibitions, I think Soundspec is included as well in this sense. And then Soundspec, Documenta, and then other things, other exhibitions as well, were founded in order for them to rethink what they can do after the war. And then maybe we can expand that notion of like, maybe there are certain wounds that we can heal larger than the post-war trauma of Europe, let's say, you know? So maybe how to do it, actually, that's the question that we're trying to do. I think like we're not alone in it as well. And I think like there's like, there's a current movement in order in going that way. Some are more interesting for us than others, of course, but I think we need to find hope right now in those things. And then maybe wants to add or not. I don't know.
Yeah. Since you're asking about wound during our interview. I think the interview was last year. That's exactly a year before. Yeah, a year before the pandemic. And then yeah, any wound is always caused by many things, wars, and also like people going to war. Of course, it brings wound. Aggressions, it causes wound. But also there are wounds which are caused by something very soft, something very, it looks like fine, but if we dig deeper, that's exactly the reason why wound is created. So to heal a wound, I think that it's everyone's task. No one is want to. I'm pretty sure no one, and we're pretty sure no one want to have wounds forever. And anyone or anyone anywhere who has wound need to be healed. Need to be healed and to gain a better life, to gain better situations. And as we may understand, and I hope that we have in the same frequency about that. The wounds that most people are facing now are caused by all those like greedy in using and exploiting the natural resources we have, where also human are being exploited. So we've been thinking that what kind of way or how to, because we are part of we are also wounded. We are also wounded while we are while we are alive, and then it's a nature that we want to gain a better life. We want to sustain. We want to live longer. So there are many other next good things that we can do, at least for us and the people around us, families, friends, neighbors, and yeah. So the wound here, the wound which are caused by, for example, let's say institutionalized actions. We think that maybe we can also the wounds that are caused by the systems, systemic the wound that are caused by the system maybe can be healed by also a systemic effort, which organized well organized or effort through experimentations, what we've been experiencing as a human being. And then that's the reason why I said earlier that the reason why we proposed Lumbung as a theme is not because we've been contemplating for weeks and weeks in the studio or in a room as an individual, but it's part of the way of life we've been practicing. Even our parents or our great grandparents who've been practicing it. You can imagine, for example, that in many like staging wooden house are moved from one land to another land with people who are people who are invited to help and then give hand to move the house. And then it's It's just that people just contributing to help the one particular person or one particular family who want to move their house from one ground to another ground. So, and we really learn a lot from this notion of the way people working together, and also one other thing that what we also learn from our life, from human, also we learn a lot from the habit of animal, which is the bees. The bees is very interesting. The bees is very interesting fauna, because the bees is very interesting creature, because they only get the essence, and then they didn't destroy. They don't destroy the essence. And then they forget how they perform as a communities, how they also really appreciate the mother nature, and then what they, and the output of what they work for is also very useful for them and for the things around them, including us human. Mm-hmm. So yeah, these things that what we've been learning from a lot to heal wounds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very fascinated by the various organisms described in many of your projects and writings. In one, you referred to the kind of ways that the collective works together as an ant colony. You know, that one individual will stand connected to the others, and one forms and takes knowledge from and around each other. In another writing, Helene spoke of birds and their notions of flocking and moving, and how these patterns and formations are kind of essential to the ways that we think of how we collect and how we move. I'm gonna throw out an ask, or just mention to everyone listening that the Q&A is open. We'll move to that in about 10 or so minutes. But yes, I think these are essential ways of thinking about how do we redress the way that we form, the way that we move. Even now being in lockdown, we've had to shift our sociality. How do we connect? When do we connect? What are those threads that have connected us before? In thinking of this discussion, Bonaventure, I'm gonna throw out your suggestion of Kassav, and how this collective and this music is essential to a moment of collecting, of reforming, of shifting culture, and shifting the way we see and connect with each other. Yeah, if I can ask you to respond to that.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I've been thinking about the group, the kind of music collective, you know, called Kassav, for many reasons, you know. And as you know, it was founded in 1979 by these guys from the Guadeloupe. And very soon, you know, members from Martinique and other islands came on board, and then they invited guys from France, from Cameroon, and so on. But what was even more spectacular was, it wasn't just a collective of bodies, right? It was a collective of ideas. So these people came in with their own knowledges, embodied knowledges, you know, to make what Kassav became. Now, Kassav to me, and it's something I've been writing on, I'm working on a project on that, as I said, is to me one of the most important, you know, projects of the 20th century. And I even dared to make the statement once that it was more important than negritude, for which scholars almost cut off my head. But I maintain that because I think that, you know, all the discourses of the negritude, you know, were embodied and continued and manifested in different ways by Kassav and Zouk as a music genre. And we know that when Kassav did the concert in Paris, I think it was really one of the first times that Paris really recognized that it is essentially a black city. They were not really accepting that, but it became very obvious because they could fill the stadium with mostly black and brown people. And it was just incredible. And that's how it's been when they travel wherever. But so Kassav is more than a collective, it's a movement. But I've been thinking about the fact that these guys have been going on since 1979 until today with a core group, but people coming and going, and what collectivity then means for them. And really, before Kassav, in Guadeloupe and Martinique, people were playing violin. That was the idea of making music a very colonial concept. And these guys came and they said, let's keep that. Let's go back to the drums. Let's go back. Let's integrate, some elements. Let's go back to Guaca, take influences from Haiti and so on and so forth, and make the kind of music we want to do. So I'm really interested in that. And the way it manifests itself in other collectives, even within the art, world, so to say. So when we're doing the Bamako Biennial, one thing that became very evident at the beginning was that I really wanted to work with collectives, photographic collectives, because it seemed as if, the mere thought of creating a collective, it's a political gesture of survival. It was just more than just a conglomeration, but the idea that we negate just individuality, we're thinking of individuality. We're thinking about the fact that we are not indivisible, but we are divisible. We are part of a collective, and we contribute to that whole, So I was thinking about that, and that brought me to a collective that was founded in the US, by African Americans in 1963 called Kamwangi, And it was a time when, Black photographers, very few of them, at least, were invited to do work for journals. You had to be Gordon Parks to be invited. If you were not him, then you had to find your way. And these guys decided to come together. But the incredible thing about this collective was the amount of strength they could gather at that time and until now. So people come and go, but it is essentially the most important school for Black photographers. So they do this continuous critique sessions, And Kamwange is, it's just unbelievable because what you learn in school is one thing, what you learn in the practice is another. And they give you that knowledge from practice, And it was incredible because they had never shown work on the African continent, so it was important to invite them. But also, it's worth mentioning the people like the Invisible Borders Collective, around Emeka Okereke, and the incredible work they've been doing, traveling the African continent. I know they were in Bangladesh, traveling as well, working with artists from the regions, but also finding different ways of seeing, because essentially that becomes the question, or the way Akimbode Akimbi would put it, finding ways of listening. To him, that is what photography actually means, But then this becomes, and I want to relate it to Diana's point, which is the singing together, but even more importantly, the listening together. How do we listen collectively, And these are things, and of course, if you're in a band and you're playing on stage, the most important thing is listening. And coming back to Kassav, Kassav was just incredibly important in listening and echoing. Listening and bringing out. So to me, they really reflected a lot of things that were happening in the African world, more than any, movement has done until now. I wanted to add one or two things in terms of collectivity, you know, because for some reason, this has occupied me in the past years, you know, so in doing the Finland Pavilion for Venice, you know, the first thing, you know, even before sending out the application for that, was calling my brother, Christopher Vessels, who was at the time based in Helsinki. Say, but how are we going to do this? How can we do this together, you know? And then Giovanna Esposito came on board, and then it grew, and at some point it was like 15 people in this very small pavilion, you know? It was just incredible how this would work, you know? More people than they could fit in the pavilion, you know? So, but it was the idea of like, okay, if you want to make a statement about Finland, you need to also come with size. Essentially, the number of bodies that would echo a different notion of Finnishness beyond that which is understood by the mass. And these people, you know, in an incredible spectrum, came together and reflected that, you know, actually epistemically more than corporeally.
I'm fascinated by the what you said about the completeness, and I think when we think about these bodies, these ideas, these necessities, these social and human necessities, there's an idea of a totality, of a completeness. And I know Helene mentioned it earlier when she spoke of the notion of the death of the collective. When is the necessity for the collective to die? And yet, why is there a necessity for the birth of collectives to complete, to total, to wholeness?
But I don't know about the completeness of it, you know, or the wholeness. I think that the collective is essentially incomplete. It is a perpetual incompleteness. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense as a collective, you know. It's a struggle, you know, to be, which is not really about being wholesome. No, you know, it is the effort, you know, to constantly create things that are more than that notion of completion. So in you know, people coming together and then they make something that is bigger than the sum of those parts, you know. So I think even completion, the notion of complete is in itself false, you know. So it's not about that. You know, if we were to look at something like savvy as a construct, you know, we've been thinking a lot these days about the trickster, you know, and the way we are just also tricksters in that, you know. So we're not really trying to complete anything. So you know, in the space of 11 years, we're now moving to the fourth space, you know. Maybe you can say it's out of necessity, but maybe it's also because of the fact that we never want to feel comfortable somewhere. So that notion of completeness is always like being comfortable with what you know. Let's move on, you know. Constantly having, you know, yes, something, you know, driving you. The notion of some kind of ultrasanity, some kind of madness, you know, something haunting and haunting.
100%. I hear you there. And I think about notions of hacking, notions of redefining through the hack. And I want to just move to Farid and Andan quickly to answer these questions of hacking systems and that notion of where they're at. And just to also mention, we do have a question, which I think after this we'll get to.
Yeah, I think it has been useful for us to communicate it that way, like we're hacking certain things, and then it's been like the operational mode as well, you know, like But after a while, especially, we have to get used to certain maturity, I think. Like, I don't think it's, at least for us, I still love people who are just like hackers, you know? But to communicate it that way or to think about it that way, it's kind of like stop being, or it's not only stop being useful, but it also has traps in it, you know? It's much more powerful to just like take over and then do what you can do, like, you know, like people here are doing already, you know, like from Koyo in Zaid Smoka, and then Diana doing with in Bangladesh context, etc. So like I think the sensibilities of hacking is useful, but we need to be careful on when we kind of like use the term, on when we are actually hacking, you know, because it needs time. Hacking needs time. Like usually even like computer hackers, you know, like they need to be invisible first for a while and then look for that weak spot and then they attack when it's time, you know? So it cannot, that kind of like operation maybe needs to be invisible, so it's not formulate even, you know. So we need to, at least from our side, being like the parasite, hacking certain type of host, all those kind of stuff. It actually holds certain trap if we talk about it right now. But for those who are still, we can see it as well, like when it's sincere or when it's like out of necessity, or it's for popularity, you know, or it's like it's being cool. So I think we can feel it as well in the process. So we are supporting it for sure. We need more even hackers. Just like there's maybe we need to invent a secret wing between us that so people who are being hacked don't know it, basically. Yet up until it's too late for them to do anything.
Invisible hackers, yeah, absolutely. Invisibility cloaks. Dan, I'm gonna ask, yeah.
Yeah, actually, to hack the regulations, to hack the systems, we need to know the systems, and then we need to know the rules and regulations very well. That's how to be the best hackers are the hackers who know in details the regulation and the systems they want to hack. And then that's the reason why many people I know, they're really into details of the system or the regulations they work with. And even if it's more interesting that when we are part of the system and regulation and want to hack it from inside, and then actually I'm pretty sure that the context is always different from one place to another context, or from one country to another countries. For example, in the Indonesian context itself, as Farid and me mentioned earlier, that in 1998 was the milestones after 32 years of the authoritarian regime. And during the authoritarian regime, we've been living under the system that actually doctrinize us to think that all the public affair is let it be the state take it and manage it, and whatever it is, like politics, freedom, and everything. So the problem comes next, that most of the people most of the people follow the system, it's not because they understand, or it's not because they think that it's significant to follow the system. It's because they are fear. They are fear toward the system. So that's we've been struggling last 20 years. That's we've been struggling last 20 years to get rid of our fear as part of the generation that were doctrinized only to follow the system because we are afraid of the system, not because we think that it's significant and it's the thing that we understand to follow. So that's what I want to say. That it's also very it's important to be the system. It's important to be the system to know how it works, and to know how it works, and to get inside. And then if Farid used the word parasite, I'm going to use the word coloring the system, because colorizing. We have our own color, and then if the system, they already have their own settled colors, and then we are in the system to colorize what the colors that already been there for many times. And then again, to hack the system, we really need to know it clearly. We can never hack the system if we are only distancing ourselves from the system. There are people who are really like to write from the edge, like making edgy notes. But let's see what kind of change they can bring. Comparing to people who involve and engage with the system, with their own idealism, and then colorizing system from inside.
And I think that it's like this notion of hacking the system is it's very important, but I think most important than that as well is to think about ways in which we can create new systems, ways in which we can create new narratives, ways in which like we can put our imaginaries into play. Like how do we
I couldn't agree more.
For this whole necessity of running after what exists and is not working, and trying to change it, and spending so much energy, like, you know, trying to change what someone else has put into place, has imagined, etc., etc. Why don't we now start thinking about the new, like the renewal? Like, of course, we don't put aside everything that has been done, because we can learn much from it, but it's really important that we start like doing new things. And this is related to the system, this is related to the type of institution that we create, this is related to the type of programs that we put forward, it's related to even like the selves, like the ways in which we've been operating as individuals for a while, and now we face a situation where we see that, okay, things need to change. Okay, how do we change things? From an individual perspective, from an institutional perspective, from a collective perspective, etc., etc. So I really think that the radical move now should be to create new entities that are more that would respond more to our realities, the realities of our context, to our needs, etc.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that it's also important to think about transitions. Bona just talked about like them occupying different spaces in the course of the 11 years they've been into existence. And like us Raw having gone through different transitional phases, like going from like a regular art center that would mostly work on exhibition making, but reflecting around education, etc. But then getting at a point where we realize that, okay, this is important, but what is urgent now is to really push forward when we think about education, to really push forward when we think about new ways of educating, new ways of learning together, etc., etc., and pushing even further when Koyo thinks about, okay, ways in which she could allow for the institution to survive after her, you know? So I think these are the radical moves that we should have now in the current moment. It's very urgent.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think there's a parallel conference, or parallel meaning it's at the same time, happening at the Smithsonian about Afro-Asian connectivities. And I'm going to refrain from saying the controversial thing, but I encourage everyone to look at it. And it's very interesting to see, like, this platform with Zaitsmoka, it's young voices, it's people who have built new systems that look like the kind of world we want to see right now. And you can see the hang up of being in the Smithsonian and having to be accountable to these structures that were built to keep people like us out. So I think it's, and what you say about transition and continuity, it's like, how do we build now something for the future so that, you know, it can, these institutions can be more representative of the worlds we want to see, or the echoes that Bona talked to that we want to listen to outside of the dominant narrative. So yeah, I think from Dhaka, with Dhaka Art Summit, it was easier to build something new than to try to hack into any system. It would be impossible.
Somebody just mentioned, I think that's Kelvin, mentioned the Black Star Lines. And I wanted to say a word, maybe also just a word of appreciation to the people in Kumasi, you know, Professor Karikacha and his group, and these guys, you know, with the notion of finding other ways of teaching, other ways of learning, other ways of being together and collaborating. I think I've hardly seen anything as important on the continent as is being practiced now from Ghana. With Ibrahim Mahama and Kwesi Ohene-Aye and all these people, you know, finding ways of supporting each other, you know, finding ways of, you know, bringing things back to the communities in which they find themselves, you know, and build, and especially building structures, building new structures. Of course, I don't think it has to be one against the other, you know. So while they would be out there doing exhibitions in other places, they will always come back and, you know, see what Ibrahim Mahama and co are doing in Tamale, for example. I think that ties exactly back to what they've learned in Kumasi, you know, with Bernard Akoy Jackson and so on and so forth. So I think this is exemplary on so many ways, you know. So I just wanted to mention that because I saw that in the comment.
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna close now just with some questions, and Michael, if you don't mind, I'll just kind of frame them a little bit. We have one question that says, what are the role of collectives in helping us navigate this particular moment? In many ways, it seems that we are at a crossroad, or is it just business as usual? And then I'm going to connect that to the second question from Thandazani Dlakama. If collecting is about the struggle to be, how does one know when the mission has been accomplished? Or is it even possible for mission to be accomplished? How does the concept of joy fit with the haunting? I think that's a critical question. I'm going to ask Bonaventure, do you want to try this notion of how to reconnect the joy with the haunting?
Oh. First, so I don't know. I don't know if I understood the question, but I'll say it's never accomplished. You know, it's in a process. We're working towards it. Now, the notion of joy, which Farid brought in, and I think it's amazing. You know, so how do we shift away from the obvious? As Farid mentioned, it seems as if the world wants us to go around, you know, with the load on our shoulder and have, you know, just with a frown. But how do we enact that joyfulness? So it is not something that is accomplished. It's because it's accomplished the day we die, right? So it's a praxis that is ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
What was the first part of the question? Sorry.
We had an anonymous attendee who just asked, what are the role of collectives in helping us navigate?
Okay. Now,
is it business as usual?
This is very interesting now. How do you be together in a period where you're not allowed to be together? How do you think of a collective while being asked to be apart? You know, how do you conglomerate? So I think that is the question of our time. Now, what has become very obvious is that we will have to find other ways, which is in a lot of our cultures, is actually quite obvious, you know, communicating in non-physical ways. So, of course, you know, Jihan El-Tahari will say, you know, but Skype has always been witchcraft to me. That's what she would say. And so how do we think of those other ways of communicating, you know, of being together, thinking together, working together? And so some of us have had to do that because we've been displaced for quite long, and people still communicate, you know. So in the architecture of encounter, we've seen that, you know, giving somebody the elbow these days is as much as giving somebody a kiss. So we will need to adapt to that, you know. We'll need to adapt to that, to this new moments. But again, it's just the shifting of intimacy, because there's nothing that says it's supposed to be the lip, you know. Maybe the elbow has those cells as well. We just have to shift the attention to the elbow and give it that attention, and then we will continue kissing with our elbows, you know. That is it. So what does it mean to think of collectives in this time? It is about shifting, you know, from what we've known until now. You know, maybe what we've known until now is actually irrelevant. You know, coming back to something that Christopher Vessis and I used to talk a lot about, you know, when Sonra said, if all we've been trying to do until now is the possible, let's try the impossible. Because the possible has brought us nowhere. So we have to work within the impossible, you know? So if the possible has been to have this kind of encounter, let's find impossible ways of encountering each other, you know? I think that is the challenge of our time. I think that's the way I would answer that.
Thank you. I'm gonna wrap up with one comment from Koyo, question. Solidarity embeds itself in an idea of equality and horizontality. However, we all know that there are always driving forces within a collective. In thinking about that, how do you think collective practice serves the push for equality? Anyone want to answer that?
I think the forum encourages sharing. And I think that's what's very interesting in these moments, is like these moments where you see situations where maybe you wouldn't think of funds or opportunities being redistributed. But yeah, that form of collective, for that collective to survive, sharing is embedded in that, which isn't necessarily found in more individualistic forms of practices.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, like, on an institutional point of view, for instance, it's very important to trust, knowing that like the institution is formed by individuals. Each individual like has its own strength and also limitation, etc. So I think it's important to be able to trust those strengths and also to be able to support when we face those limitations. And also, I think that also something else that could be interesting to think about when we talk about equality is this ability of giving the due recognition to what those individuals are doing in the collective. I think it's very important.
Thank you. I see we do have 2 more questions, but we are running out of time.
Sorry, I'm just thinking about this thing about equality, and I'm struggling with that, you know, because it presupposes a gradient, right? So the question is, how does one, you know, shift that, you know, that gradient, you know, to make it a more level ground, right? And I don't know if I can, you know, answer that, but I would like to give 2 examples of, you know, say collectives that have been trying to do something similar, you know. One is the Mfon collective, you know, which is a collective of women, Black photographers, you know, from all over the world. They come together. And, or another collective would be Association des Femmes Photographes du Mali, you know. So what became very clear to them was the way women were kind of, have constantly been sidelined in photography, in the art world, the fact that you do these big biennials and the, you know, 10% if it comes to the best women and so on and so forth. So again, them coming together, you know, and there's a strength in that coming together. So Mfon published this incredible book, this extremely seminal book of Black women photographers, which, you know, I think it's out of print, but I think every library has to have a copy, you know. Or the Association des Femmes Photographes du Mali, which was a similar case, you know, putting women photographers together and having them present their own works, you know, speak for themselves, you know, present themselves the way they want and not mediated by some male curators here and there, and so on and so forth. So these are examples to me of, I don't even know if it's equality of you know, claiming territory and yes, just speaking for themselves.
Thank you for that. I think very much about kind of the rise of extremistan, this lateral thinking and this lateral move that I think in a way has been expanded on during this lockdown period and this insulation that we've been forced to endure. In closing, I just want to say thank you to everyone for participating. There are a few other questions which we haven't been able to get to, but thank you all for your participation, your time. We've really quite hashed out from dynamic places these questions of what is the urgency of solidarity right now? What is radical? Is it even? Where's the solid in solidarity? I know this tension between the fragment and the whole has been also tested in the conversation. So thank you. We do plan and hope to have some kind of a resource, a compilation, a putting together of many of these abstract ideas and concerns at the moment. I think the summit is a move to shift the institution and understand these places for advocacy and political engagement. At the beginning of this Monday, Ashil suggested that the anti-museum is the museum form that we should be taking. So I think we accept and hold a lot of your inputs and thinking towards what does this moment mean to us and what does radical solidarity mean. So thank you again. I'm gonna introduce my colleague now, Phokeng Setai, who's gonna continue on the second half of the afternoon. But thank you to the panelists. Thank you so
much. Thank you very much, Tammy.
Thank you. This was great. Thanks, everyone.
For you, Storm, and the whole.
Thank you for you. All the best.
Take care.
Oh wait, elbows, elbows.
Elbows.
Bon, I'm never gonna think about elbows the same again after that.
Think about them as lips.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Tammy, for the lovely and enriching discussion. And thanks goes out to all the panelists for providing us with such in-depth and engaging conversation. I, for one, felt very nourished by your guys' interaction. Absolutely awesome stuff. I would also like to thank everyone for tuning in and for being with us today. Thank you to Belinda, Michael, Tiffany, and everyone else working hard behind the scenes to make sure the summit goes smoothly. My name is Phokeng Setai. I'm a research fellow at the Center for Humanities Research, flagship in critical thought in the humanities, and a doctoral candidate in the Department of Anthropology at the University of the Western Cape. I'm also working part-time as a research assistant in the curatorial department at Zatsmoka. It is in this capacity that I would like to introduce to you the film that we'll be screening for you this evening. Mother, I'm Suffocating, This Is My Last Film About You, is an essay feature narrative film that got released in the year 2018 to much critical acclaim. The film was selected for Final Cut in Venice, where it won several awards. It went on to premiere at the Berlinale Forum in 2019 and continues to be shown in film festivals and exhibitions, including at MoMA and Boza in Brussels and many other parts of the world. The international media has billed this film as Mosese's farewell to his homeland. Lemohang himself described his film as his personal lamentation of life lived in self-imposed exile, both from his native country of Lesotho and his new adopted home of Berlin, Germany. Mother, I'm Suffocating, This Is My Last Film About You, tells a spellbinding story about a life lived perennially on the margins. Mosese expresses his feelings of longing for his home country through a visual poeticism in which he delicately sutures the use of powerful slow motion sequences with strikingly haunting black and white imagery. A task he does quite exquisitely, adopting a visual language that evokes the stirring dark shadows reminiscent of the pseudo-magical photography of the late Ndate Santumu Phokeng. Mosese crafts the story through the voice of a female narrator that takes us through the journey of the central character, a cross-bearing woman who painstakingly perambulates through the breathtaking landscape of Marseille, the capital of Lesotho. The narrating voice acts as a guiding thread into understanding the beautifully complex and abstract mind of the artist himself. Deriving inspiration from the Soviet avant-garde, the masterful poetry of Russian poetess Anna Akhmatova, and the expressionist painting of the German artist Kathy Kollwitz, Mother, as Lemohang likes to affectionately refer to it in short, is a work of profound skill and poetic majesty. This film that you're about to watch can be likened to something like a visual metaphor, a mystical allegory of sort, alluding to the damaging effects of the legacy of colonialism on African soil, not to mention the psychological and spiritual trauma that Christianity has wrought upon the people of this continent. Mosese weaves his childhood memories of growing up in Lesotho, a country landlocked in South Africa, to tell a story about his homeland, a nation that tends to go unseen, and often easily forgotten by the eyes of the global community. Lemohang intersperses these memories with mesmerizing imagery to intimately portray life in the streets of Marseille. Mother, I am suffocating. This is my last film about you, is an important and groundbreaking film, a visual and lyrical palimpsest, if you will, that in its viewing will surely invoke feelings of love, rage, a sense of suffocation, and liberation inside the viewer. To watch the film, you can find the link in the chat box at the bottom of your screens. It's important to note that this is a once-off screening, meaning that you can only access the viewing of it today only. And please join us afterwards, after the screening at 7:30 for a conversation that I will be having with Lemohang himself. Thank you very much and enjoy.